Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us here on our YouTube channel for episode 796. Well, hey, coronavirus, right? It's everywhere. It's a topic everywhere you turn. Everyone's talking about it. We're going to do that today. I'm actually going to be speaking with an ag economist, John Nalivka. Man, that was a hard one for me to get out. John Nalivka. He's coming on representing his company, Sterling Marketing Incorporated, out of Vail, Oregon. And we're going to be talking about the supply chain with beef cattle and how everything that is going on from the hoarding to the closing down of restaurants and everything in between is going to impact cattle prices, demand for beef, and some of the other variables that factor into all of this as well. So let's get started with that right now. John, welcome to the show today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Matt. More than happy to be on with you.
All right. Well, where are we talking to you at right now? Are you out in Vail?
We live just east of Vail, and lived here for bought a place out here about 26 years ago, actually.
Okay. So. And now most of my listeners are thinking Colorado, but I know better than that. You're not too far from me. You're in Vail, Oregon.
Yeah, that's a little different than Vail, Colorado.
A little different. That is right. It's drier, and the mountains aren't as steep in Vail, Oregon. Although
that's right.
You don't have to go too far to get to steep mountains, but yeah, I like your part of the country there in Eastern Oregon. I really enjoy it over there, especially once you get out. Personally, for me, once you start going west and you kind of get out past Ontario and into that Vail area, I really start to like it.
Yeah, going towards Burns and then on over to Bend. That's pretty nice country out through there.
Yeah, it sure is. Well,
we've got a lot of good fly fishing out here. So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all over this country, and so it's great to speak with you. You came recommended by one of our advertisers, one of our clients, Powder River Livestock Handling Equipment, and they were telling me about some of the work that you had done for them. And I was eager to speak with you, especially considering our current situation with the COVID-19 and coronavirus and trying to figure out where this is all heading. And I'm assuming that you're probably getting a lot of the same questions right about now.
Yeah, and I do a lot of forecasting I do a lot of meat cut price forecasting. I've got clients, I've got chain restaurants, packers, processors, pretty much across the entire supply chain. So I do a lot of forecasting of a lot of the beef cuts, and I was just updating my forecasts, and it's I will say it is a challenge.
Yeah, I bet it is. So the name of your business is Sterling Marketing Incorporated, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So if you could, let everybody listening know what your business is, what your business does.
Well, I work with, as I say, I work with, packers, processors, feedlots, chain restaurants, pretty much everybody, all entities across the entire supply chain. I work both with the beef and the pork industries.
Okay.
And economic consulting, forecasting, analysis, address specific issues that clients may have with regard to pricing, procurement issues, sales, and I've been doing this. We've had Sterling Marketing since 1991. The very January of 1991 is when we started doing what I'm doing today. I bought my partner's share of the company in 1994. We were near Kansas City and Johnson County, Kansas when we started, and then I bought his share of the business in 1994, and we moved up to Vail. So.
Okay. And so when it comes to forecasting, and I'll just take one segment of your client base, but say a chain restaurant, why are they interested in meat cut pricing forecasts?
Procurement strategies and pricing on their procurement of raw material primarily.
Okay.
And so I do a lot of that and look at specific cuts and ground beef, and I do a lot with the ground beef and other specific cuts. But I have calls with clients some on a weekly basis, some on a monthly basis, and just go over various things that are going on in the industry and looking at forward pricing.
And so I'm assuming that, say, for a chain restaurant, they're trying to be. I mean, for them, if the variables, or I guess if there were no variables, it'd be much easier for them to come up with a good profit margin and to operate their business and to kind of know what those margins were going to be. But when it comes to a commodity like meat and beef and pork, that's kind of a moving target. So the closer they can get to projecting that accurately, the better they can do in terms of managing their bottom line, I would assume.
Yeah, and out front, and you hear a lot of market analysis that on a weekly basis is pretty short term.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the analysis that I do and the market advisory that I provide to clients is more intermediate to longer term, going out. Well, for instance, now I forecast monthly, and I'm out through the end of 2021.
Oh wow!
On my forecast. So, and I'm not saying that obviously there's a lot of things that change within it. Obviously, even we're looking at one right now. Who would have known we'd have been in this situation?
Sure.
But it's just a matter of trying to, based on the information that we have and the assumptions that I make that go into the forecast, then we create a discussion and a conversation out of that,
mm-hmm.
and discuss where where they're going forward.
So that's really interesting. If you're predicting out that far to the end of 2021, so oh man, that's what, 19 months, 20 months away or something like that. I guess we're in 18 months or no, 20 months away because we're just starting April. So 20 months out, is that projection based on the amount of calves that are getting dropped on the ground right now?
Well, it's based on, I start with the production part of the, and look at the cattle inventory, where I believe the inventory is going,
mm-hmm.
and then the number of, what our slaughter will be, and the weights. I do all that individually. You put all that back together, and then generate production forecasts, and then from that production, then you have to look at the overall total meat situation. It's not just how much beef there is, but all the competing meats, beef, mm-hmm. pork, poultry, and then look at the trade, the export, the import side of it, and basically come up with a balance sheet. And given this, quantity of beef, and or pork and poultry that'll be available, I project prices from that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, and it's not just based on what we have in the U.S. It's based on like Mexican beef and Australian beef and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, you have to look at the overall trade side of it, and obviously the trade situation is has become somewhat of a it changes over time too, and we've seen some significant changes over the last year, particularly on the pork side. Well, the pork and the beef with African swine fever in China, and now mm-hmm. we've just put coronavirus on top of that.
Sure.
But there's the trade and the exports. We've grown our exports. We've got new trade agreements in place this year, and that makes quite a bit of difference on where the prices are going to be.
Okay. Well, now, what was your pathway to getting here? How did you get involved in agriculture, and how did you get involved in doing this forecasting?
Well, I've got in my previous life when I went to University of Idaho. I got a bachelor's degree at the University of Idaho in 1976. I've got a bachelor's degree in animal science.
Okay.
I went to the University of Idaho originally. I went up there on I had a full ride NROTC scholarship, and I was that was right at the very close of the Vietnam War in the early 70s,
mm-hmm.
and I decided to finish my education, finish my degree, and I dropped my scholarship.
Okay.
So at any rate, I finished my degree, and then when I came out, I worked on large corporate ranches, in Montana, Wyoming, ran a ranch in California, Nevada. I worked on two or three ranches, big corporate ranches in Nevada
Mm-hmm.
and in Wyoming and Montana. So some of the largest ranches are in the country. And then about 1981, I decided I was going to change my path again, and I decided to go back to graduate school at the University of Nevada, and I got a master's degree in ag econ at the University of Nevada.
Okay.
Then I went to work for. From there, I was offered a position at USDA in Washington D.C. as a ag economist focusing on the cattle industry. So I went. My wife and I, we had just got married, and we moved back to Washington D.C. And actually, we were married when I was in graduate school at UNR. And then I got done, and we went to Washington D.C. in 1984, and I went to work for ERS, the Economic Research Service of USDA. I was back there for about 3 years and decided, I could only live in Washington D.C. for so long, and I just about hit that max. I would say it's an interesting place to work, but
Yeah.
you have to be, that. And so I got offered a position at Oregon State University as well as they gave me a fellowship to do a PhD, and so I came back to Oregon State. I didn't do the PhD, but I did run their market information program for 2.5 years, which was at that time, it's no longer it is, but at that time that was mandated by Oregon State legislation that they provide market news and market information to agricultural producers in the state. And then I was offered a position by the Helming Group in Kansas City, which used to be the old Livestock Business Advisory Services. Bill Helming had started that company in 1972, and he offered me the position of Director of Research. So we went back to Kansas City, and then in 1988, and then in 1991, we took Sterling Marketing, another partner, and I.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of it's all focused on agriculture, but it's kind of a difference from sitting on a horse in Buckaroo and to doing what I do today. So
yeah, I was thinking about that. Running the ranch in the middle of Nevada is quite a bit different than Washington D.C. Those places are starkly different.
Yeah, immensely. So, but it's it's where I wanted to. I've been very happy with what I've done for the last 30 years with Sterling Marketing, and it's been a good business. I immensely enjoy the people that I work with. I made a lot of good friends in the industry and across the industry, and in all sectors of it, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, that's great. And what I wanted to talk to you about today obviously has to do with the coronavirus and COVID-19 and all of this. And so I was kind of, a couple episodes ago, I was kind of just pontificating on the show about what happens if this occurs, what happens if that occurs. And it dawned on me that I do not have the skill set nor the brain power to figure this out. And so I went on a quest searching for somebody I could ask about a couple of these scenarios. And I'm sure that you're considering many scenarios I haven't even thought of. But, I'm kind of sitting here, in my perspective, sitting in Kuna, Idaho, is that, farmers and ranchers, they've got no choice. They're going to work. We've got to feed cows. We've got to plant. We've got to irrigate. We've got to do all of that. There is no putting it off for a month and just kind of taking a time out. So we're still working, and so in my mind, the agricultural sector is relatively, and I mean relatively unaffected as compared to other sectors like some of your clients in the restaurant industry and things like that. But then I got to thinking about, agriculture does not operate in a vacuum. There's going to be places like if we're on the livestock side, there's going to be places like packing houses where you might have a governor who's come in and said, hey, you guys are not exempt and you have to social distance or whatever. And maybe these places are going to shut down for a month or something like that, which would cause a stockpile of finished livestock, or the restaurant industries, they're shut down, so they're obviously not consuming all of the beef that's available. And I got to thinking about it and wondering how, what are we looking at if we see this major slowdown in the consumption of meat, pork, beef, lamb, whatever it is. Obviously producers, they're just not going to have it. They're not going to sell it. I don't know what's going to go on. So that's really what I wanted to ask you is what happens as this other end of the supply chain comes to a halt and we've got all these animals that are alive, what happens?
Well, one thing with our food supply, and we have as you well know, Matt, a very, very efficient food production system in this country. Agriculture, we are the most efficient producers of agricultural commodities and food in the world. Mm-hmm. I think everybody pretty well knows that our food supply is essential.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at today with coronavirus. This is an essential industry that must continue to operate. The problem, or not necessarily a problem, but the potential problem with this coronavirus is if you get it in the plant. Okay. And we've had that happen. And I would say this, that from the packers' perspective, they have gone to extensive lengths and to assure that they can continue to operate and still be, they're very, very well aware of any issues that may come up if they get an employee that's got, coronavirus, mm-hmm. and they're in the plant. Well, the plans are laid out. They've already taken, they've got the plan in place that, how are we going to deal with this? And like I say, we've seen it already in a couple of plants, and they've instituted that plan, and they've got the strategy in place that they can continue to operate and not be, shut down for 30 days. I mean, just simply cannot. We couldn't. That would be very difficult to deal with. But we already know what the fire at the Tyson plant last August did.
Right.
I mean, and you get, and so there's always been there's always a potential for some sort of an event or a crisis type situation that's going to occur that's going to impact the food industry and agriculture. That didn't just start with coronavirus. We've that's through the history of agriculture. We've had that. And and I think as the industry gets more and more becomes increasingly efficient and technology is in place, and we've already seen with a lot of because of the labor. I mean, the labor issue has been a huge issue in the packing industry. Well, generally across agriculture in the last, 2 or 3 years, we've seen that and we know it. Well, they've already addressed that issue, and we're increasingly putting more and more robotics into these plants. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, I guess I'm not too terribly, I'm aware of it and I certainly understand it, but I'm not in any sort of a panic situation about our food supply, because I think that we do a pretty good job. I think the problems that we're seeing in the retail stores right now, where we've had this surge in buying activity and hoarding, as consumers, I think what we've seen with coronavirus and over the last 2 or 3 weeks is there's a lot of people in this country who really are not prepared to have a crisis in their life.
Sure. Sure.
And I think we've seen that fear and that somewhat of a panic situation take over. Mm-hmm. And as people have rushed and cleared out the shelves in these stores. Well, I think it's just a sign of our society today. I think the biggest thing that, or one thing that I've looked at, we've seen a surge in buying. We know these prices have been, shot up significantly, both at the wholesale and the retail level. Mm-hmm. And, the question I have when we get on the other side of coronavirus, how does that impact the market and prices going forward from there? And because people, I mean, how full are freezers now? How full are freezers
Right.
going to be in June? And so I guess from just as a briefly a brief statement is I think we'll get on the other side of this, and it's going to take a while to get things back on track and back to some semblance of normal, particularly in the restaurant business, because I can tell you that it has been extremely difficult for these chain restaurants when they've had to shut down. So
well,
that's kind of some of the stuff.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts to the supply chain. So, and I was starting with the assumption that, of course, that no cattle producers are going to be slowing down because of this. And so I was kind of starting there at the packing house.
Right.
And to your knowledge, no packing houses, no governors have come in and said, "Hey, your density of employees here violates our social distancing guidelines. Therefore, you have to shut down." So that, to your knowledge, that has not happened at this point.
Not that I know of, and it's again, I think most people would certainly agree that that food production is an essential industry in this country.
Yeah.
Obviously people have to eat.
Right. So we've got right now, we've got all the hoarding going on, and so that's causing, and we'll just take beef, that's causing the price of beef to spike. I think the Monday after the president made the emergency declaration, I dropped a steer off at our local butcher, just a small butcher shop, and his phone was ringing off the hook. People were calling, trying to buy halves of beef, quarters of beef, whole pigs, everything, and he's sitting there taking orders going, I hope I'm going to be able to buy enough meat to fill all these orders. So, supply and demand, I'm assuming that led to a spike in the beef prices. Am I correct about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and the problem is that people get somewhat in a panic situation, and it's because of the uncertainty. You can easily come to the conclusion, well, my gosh, we may not be able to buy groceries for another 2 months.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the conclusion. And there's a lot of people who just simply are not accustomed to having a freezer full of meat.
Right.
I mean, we're sitting here with a half a beef in a freezer.
Yeah, same here.
And and so it's like you just kind of, I might use that up, but I'm not going to do it. It's going to be the same things I always do.
Correct. Yeah.
But people who don't do that kind of hit the panic button.
Okay.
Because in a lot of people's minds, the next thing's going to happen, the grocery store is going to be closed.
Right.
And they've seen the restaurant closed. Now what's going to, and so rush to the supermarket, rush down to Albertsons or wherever, Walmart, Costco. And I mean, gee whiz, being in Costco over the last month, it's like you can't get through there. And interestingly enough, we were in Costco here, it was 2 Sundays ago, and the meat case was full with the exception of a lot of the fresh poultry items. That's what they were out of.
Okay.
But there was plenty of beef, plenty of pork. But then you go back to the toilet paper, and you couldn't buy a roll of toilet paper probably in the state of Idaho or the state of Oregon.
Right.
And so it's kind of I think it's this panic and anxiety situation that people get into that they just, they're not accustomed to really. I mean, I've worked out on ranches that were, 100 miles from the closest town.
Right.
And the ranch basically had enough commodities that probably could have lasted a crew of 12 guys for 60 days.
Right.
In the cookhouse. So, but that's not the way Americans live today anymore. And so but you're right. It's a volatile situation, and a lot of the volatility is because of the uncertainty. And it's like we create, it adds on to that volatility because of people's actions and their response.
So,
And we've got a lot of food in this country, obviously, and there shouldn't be any grocery stores. It's an issue of distribution,
yeah.
is what it is.
Well, it makes me curious of what is going to happen with prices going down the road. And so as I'm sitting here thinking about it, and this is why I'd love to get your perspective. So right now, people have filled their freezers. Maybe this is a practice they never, ever do. So that the price of beef, the price of pork, chicken, whatever that may be, shot up as people just are stuffing their freezers and getting ready for the long haul. And then as we come out of this, if people still have an abundance of inventory in their freezers, and if restaurants, and so I don't know what to say or what to think is going to happen. You've got all these people that have way more in their freezers than they normally have, so they don't need to go shopping for a while as we come out of this. And I'm projecting this as a possibility. But then on the other hand, during this entire time, has that been balanced out by the fact that demand at restaurants has dropped so much that restaurants aren't buying meat? So does it level off because you got one sector buying so much, but one sector stopping their purchases, or does one outweigh the other?
Well, I think that's the whole issue, Matt, because I think that you've got to me, the primary moving parts going forward are, number one, of those freezers and how much people have purchased already. And then secondly, how long does it take before, the restaurant industry, they've kind of got to gear up and get going again. And then there's this whole issue of pent-up demand.
Right.
Americans are not used to being in their house or in their apartment for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, even 2 days, let alone 2 or 3 weeks. So, and then we're going into the grilling season as we start into May.
Right.
So my assumption has been, and I have just chosen this time frame. But I thought, we would by the middle of May, we could start to be on the other side of this whole coronavirus situation. So we're going into the grilling season, one of the primary demand periods for the beef industry during the year. So seasonally, demand moves up. People are buying steaks but we also typically go into a period our production is increasing as we go into the third quarter.
Okay.
Well, now we bought forward, and we basically number one, on the supply side, we've moved a lot of beef in the last two or 3 weeks because of this hoarding and filling freezers. So, and that's kind of a good thing, because we came into this year with plenty of cattle. Our on-feed numbers were up 2%. Plus, we've brought our weights up to a record level now with these cattle.
Okay.
So we've got an entirely different set of circumstances than last year. But by having this hoarding, we've pulled a lot of this product into putting it in the freezer. It's no longer needs to it's out of distribution. It's in somebody's freezer. So if we get on the other side of coronavirus, what is the mindset of people? Are they so happy to get out and get going and do something? To heck with that meat, to that product I bought and put in the freezer. I'll eat that later. We're going down to the steakhouse.
Okay.
We're going down to Roadhouse or Chandler's or wherever it might be. And by golly, we're going to go out and eat dinner. I'm tired of being cooped up in the house.
Right.
Other than to get in the car and drive to work. And that's the other part of it too. There's a lot of people in this country who have lost their job.
Yeah.
And once the economy gets back rolling again, obviously, then people will get employed, will get back to work again. But there's probably some people who may have lost their job permanently. They're not permanently, but they're out of the current job and they're going to have to go find another one.
Right.
So I think it's positive from the standpoint of the economy. This has been a huge negative on our economy. It doesn't take a lot of talk to people understand that.
Right.
But I think it's pretty positive that when we came into this, we had a very strong economy coming into it, which helps. So I guess the issue is, can we get back, on the other side of coronavirus and get the economy in some semblance of normal or back to where we were? I mean, there's a lot of people think the stock, and maybe it's entirely possible, and whether the stock market reflects, people's, general mindset in the economy, that's another issue. But you got to get everything kind of going back on track. So there's the two issues. Will people continue to use out of that freezer stock that they've now built up, or are they just going to say, I've got to get out and I'm going down to the restaurant, or I'm going to go buy some steaks. I just might go down to the meat case and buy some fresh beef,
right,
instead of pulling out that freezer and buy some steaks, and we're going to grill steaks. So, you've got all this kind of going on at once, and all these moving parts,
So it seems like so mid-May, your projection, if we come out of this and people are kind of in this rejoicing, celebrating mood, and they're going to go out to dinner, or they're going to go buy fresh steaks to have that big barbecue or whatever that may be, it seems to me that may happen, and just from my mindset, that may happen for a short while, but then everyone's still going to have this stockpile of meat in the freezer. So at some point, there's got to be some sort of a balancing out or a leveling off, right, of all this inventory that's already out there, even if there is a short-term, another spike short-term because people are happy and they're released, kind of. Would you think that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that's absolutely true, and I actually wrote about that a couple of weeks ago. That's kind of, you can go through this, but you kind of end up at the same spot. And eventually, if somebody's got a freezer full of meat, they're going to go back to pulling that freezer out of that,
right,
or that meat out of that freezer, as
right,
opposed to going down to the meat case in the supermarket. However, there's the other part of this too, is that we have a pretty good opportunity for quite a bit of export business this year.
Okay.
So how much will you take away with the export side of it? And I think that's still, particularly since Canada has now signed the USMCA, and I'm kind of looking at a time frame of somewhere probably August, September before we really start to see, and it didn't, between us and Canada, obviously that's primarily a dairy situation. The dairy industry and the dairy markets will benefit there. But we still we'll build some pretty good trade with Mexico. We've got the new U.S.-Japan agreement that came into effect on January 1, that they've redone the agreement with South Korea, and obviously there's China with the African swine fever didn't go away.
Right.
And so there's still, plenty of opportunity, and we've already seen it on the pork industry, But, you get out there, and I don't, will the export side pick up enough of the slack? I mean, I think that's a huge question.
Yeah.
But it's there, and I have a different, people can get going after coronavirus is saying, and then I'll just continue to use my time frame of mid-May, if that's, I have no expert knowledge as to why that might be, but just what I read. But we have changed, people's behavior, obviously, from this, and we've also changed their bank accounts.
Yeah.
And so you've got a lot of things that are, plus, all that, that freezer full of meat, and all of a sudden there's a lot of things that are not very positive towards lifting these prices, significantly going into the end of the year. But I do think, too, that we're going to have, we've continued to, I think we'll continue to see, we started liquidating the herd last year. I think we're going to see a continuation of that. So we are on a downward trend in terms of the cattle cycle, in terms of reducing the cattle numbers.
Well, You mentioned the freezer full of meat, and there's another interesting aspect to this, and I don't know if this will be the case or not, but what percentage of people who went out and filled their freezers full of meat will have a mindset shift where they go, that's it, from now on I'm going to have a freezer full of meat, meaning all that meat they just purchased, it stays in the freezer. They're always going to keep that full, and so I guess that could help the price as well, because they'd still be out consuming.
Yeah, no, that's also, yeah, that's another scenario, and how about the people, and this would go along with that, how about the people who didn't do a lot of cooking at home that now decided, well, maybe I will do some more cooking at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many variables.
Yeah. I think the restaurant, and we're in a little different situation here, and I mean, I think Boise has become more like, some of the larger cities, and the demographics and as much as it's changed over the last few years, but there's just a lot of people who simply do not cook at home, nor do they want to, and they're perfectly happy to eat. And there's some of those people, they're not going back. They're not going to go back to cooking a meal in the kitchen every night, And
well, let me ask you about the feeders right now, the cattle feeders, because to me this is all very fascinating, and I know this is what you do every day, John, but it's really fascinating to me. So right now, let's say you're a cattle feeder, and you've got cattle that are finished, they're ready to go to slaughter. So that's the period you're at. But you've got people, they filled their freezers. You've got restaurants that are shut down, or they're just doing takeout, so their business is down by 80% or whatever that may be. And so all of a sudden, this demand just shuts off. What are these feeders doing?
Well, I think part of the I mean, we've already seen a little bit of pressure on these prices already this week from last week, but I think there's only one strategy in a feedlot, and unfortunately, I hate to say it, but the way you keep your break-evens low in a feedlot is you keep your feeder cattle costs down. First cost of the cattle coming into the feedlot, and that's been obviously part of the problem. With the guys running cattle on grass or cow-calf guys, is that they've seen lower prices, but I would say this too, Matt. This is, I don't paint this as a disaster. I mean, we've seen lots of times in the cattle industry, and I mean, I've only been, I've been around it for, it's bumping close to right at about 50 years. And I paid a lot closer attention over the last 40 years.
Okay.
But there's been, I remember, you look, when we had mad cow disease, look at the chaos that caused, and we've had lots of times when things are kind of clicking along really, really well, and then all of a sudden something happens, and it just changes the entire market and where we're at. So, you've still got to keep, and I just hammer on this constantly, from the standpoint of the feedlot, it's keeping those costs in line with a break even that is pretty attainable. And to me, when you've got break evens in the feedlot of $1.15 or lower, then that's something you can probably work with. And our feed costs are, our grain costs are a lot lower this year than where we thought we'd be, given those floods in the Midwest and how much crop we actually thought we lost, which we didn't lose.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, I drove down through. I was on July 15th. I drove from Omaha to Sioux City, and the next day from Sioux City back down to Kansas City. And I gotta say, watching those what that flood damage did along the Missouri River on the TV, and seeing it in person driving down Interstate 29 was two different things.
Okay.
and I'll tell you that, seeing that much water and the damage it had done, it kind of put things in a real perspective. So I, particularly those guys back there, whether it be a feedlot or a cow-calf operation, those floods, those guys are still reeling from that, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got to be keeping those break-evens in line, and as soon as break-evens get away from us and we start pulling up these feeder cattle prices, and the market won't, it's just not there, then suddenly you have these huge losses, and one way or the other, that's going to trickle right down through the entire industry.
Right. Yeah. In my mind, I kind of see it as a line of cattle all walking in one direction and then just getting stopped, and everything's just backing up all the way back to the cow-calf guy.
Well, we came into this year with the potential and I think we've alleviated a little bit of it because of moving as many cattle as we have as much beef as we have over the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But when we came into this market this year with 2% more cattle in the feedlot with record heavy weights,
mm-hmm.
There was the potential for a big problem,
yeah.
no matter how you looked at it.
Yeah.
Because if the demand couldn't keep up with it, and I said the same thing the other day on the call with the pork board after the hogs and pig report, is that we've got a record number of hogs in the country. We're on our second year of record pork production. We've got record beef production. And in total, we've got total per capita meat supplies at 228 pounds. And that's a lot of meat to work through,
mm-hmm.
And that quantity of meat, plus putting on top of its current situation with all the uncertainty, I mean, it's a challenge to get through all this, and so that brings me to what I have talked about with every cattle association convention I've talked to. I've said cow-calf guys have got to get to where that they can get premiums, and the way you do that is with these branded beef programs.
Mm-hmm. And
it can't be left to chance anymore, or that everything will take care of itself. Guys have got to focus on what's it costing me to run this ranch. I got to know down to the penny. What's it costing me to run a cow and produce a calf on this ranch, and where's the market that I can get enough premium over and above the commodity price that I can make this thing work.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of got adamant about it, and probably irritated some people because I've kind of got probably talk about it too much, but I think that's the only way,
Yeah.
And
so finding a niche, some sort of a niche. Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And there's plenty of them in the Northwest. There's Painted Hills beef. There's country natural beef. There's niches here that
mm-hmm.
that are that can be filled. And if you can get another $200 per head premium, $200 is $200.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And sometimes that premium is the difference between having your feeding margin in the red versus
mm-hmm.
positive.
Well, it's a fascinating moment in time, and especially considering agriculture and just kind of seeing how this all comes together, John.
Yeah, it's an example of these break evens. And people did very well in 2014 and 15. There's no doubt about it. We had a 60-year low on cattle numbers, tight supplies of cattle, and everything was just clicking. Plus, we were improving demand and the quality. From 2015 coming this way forward, we have significantly improve the quality of the cattle, the quality of the product we produce,
mm-hmm.
and it's obvious. You can see it in the cattle that are grading choice or higher, and people willing to pay more for beef.
Mm-hmm.
But We had record high prices for feeder cattle in those years, and we ended up with break evens coming out of the feedlot in 2015, second half 2015, that ranged between $1.50 and $1.60. And as a result of that, when this market started to weaken, as we got to the end of 2015, and what we did, then we made the cattle heavier in order to try and get those break evens down. I mean, it's a pretty simple formula.
Right.
Well, in the process of doing that, we made things worse, because then that led to more beef, and the market just collapsed. And we had feedlots in December of 2015 that were losing between $600 and $800 a head,
man,
which is just unreal. And we don't need to be in that position again. Yeah, I don't think there's very many feedlots that want to go through that again.
Sure.
And so, I think it's a huge issue of really paying attention to those numbers. And I understand there's plenty to do. I mean, guys are calving right now, and there's just plenty to do without sitting at the table and figuring out, what my break even on the ranch is. But I think most people would find it was time well spent, and it may turn out that it's easy to throw numbers out, and you might be surprised at where you really stand. Not necessarily negatively, but I mean, things may look a lot better than they really are.
Sure.
And or they may look a lot worse. But I think it's just imperative, and then taking that information and that knowledge and going out and finding, okay, so where can I find a market that's going to make this work, and really, chasing that market, and it may make. I think most people have the kind of cattle. Sometimes there's decisions that go into these branded programs, and do I want to be natural? Do I want to be GAP approved? And I mean that's a decision you have to make.
Yeah.
But I think it's just become imperative that guys have to take it into their own hands now and say, well, I'm going to continue to ranch, and I'm going to continue to run this herd of cows, but by golly, it's going to have to be profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate all your insight and all your information. If somebody listening, if they wanted to contact you, they wanted more information about what you do, how would you want them to go about that?
Probably the best way to get a hold of me, Matt, is to just, send me an email. And I actually have a website. It's sterlingmarketinginc.com, all one word.
Okay.
sterlingmarketinginc.com.
Okay. And I'll put the links to both of those up on the website for when this episode publishes. Great.
Yeah. And then because people. And I've had many people ask me since I do that beef and I do those profit trackers on Farm Journal on drovers, and I've had lots of people contact me over the last 4 or 5 years since I've been doing that for them, that if I have anything that I provide to just a ranch out here, if I have any publications or anything I haven't really done that, but I have looked into it. I continue to look into it and try to create something that people can, that's valuable, that has some use for them. I think you can look at market information all day long, and you really kind of have to, have some ideas out of it. I try to do stuff for people that's not just same old.
Okay.
So.
Well, John, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for sharing all this great information with us.
Yeah, you are more than welcome. I was very, enjoyed visiting with you.
Well, thank you for being here, everybody, and special thanks to John Nalivka for coming on and sharing his expertise and all that great information with us here on the show today. And as always, enjoy your journey to the ultimate lifestyle business, agriculture.